Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is DK Bhattacharya and today we'll discuss about relationship with other branches of anthropology. If we take a very oversimplistic definition of anthropology, very oversimplistic, then it will mean that it studies man in time and space. Now you can study man to the last level of his cell, his marrows, his bones and everything. Still you won't know whether he was a Hindu or a Muslim or whether he used to speak Tamil or Telugu. In other words, man is the only animal in the animal kingdom which does not have a behavior which is species specific. That means man in Japan does not speak the same way as man in South Africa. But a dog in Japan speaks the same way as the dog in South Africa. Meaning thereby a dog has a species specific behavior whereas man does not have a species specific behavior. In other words, in order to satisfy the grand definition that we study man in time and space, we have to say we study man in his behavior as also in his physical dimensions. In other words, in living man, we have to study the behavior, that is behavioral anthropology or call it cultural anthropology, and the physical dimension which is done by physical anthropologists. But what about the other part of the definition? The other part of the definition was it studies man in time and space. That means it studies man of the past as well. So if you study the man of the past, you have to study his cultural behavior as also its physical dimension. And the cultural behavior of man in the past is studied by prehistoric archaeology. And the physical dimension of man of the past is studied by human paleontology. We must add here one point, that these past studies are reconstructive studies and they are not empirical realities. They are not empirical because you have to reconstruct. For instance, you don't know the skin color of past man, you don't know the eye color of past man. The same way, you do not know many of the behavior of the past man. Only those behavior of the past man we are trying to reconstruct, those who have left a product of the behavior. So the product of the behavior is the antiquity, which is our raw material, which is our data, on the basis of which we reconstruct behavior. Thus, we can say that we have studied man of today as also man of yesteryears. Having said as much, we find that the only branch of anthropology which is very close to archaeology and the work of archaeologists is physical anthropology. Physical anthropologists are all the time doing fossil hunting, at least in the last century. And the fossil hunting has gone hand in glove with the hunting of the cultural material that comes with the fossils. For instance, in Dusseldorf, we found tools as also the Neanderthal skull. So we have the tools, the product of behavior, along with the fossils in all the African sites, in Lake Turkana, for instance, or the Olduvai Gorge and so on. So the subject which goes hand in hand with archaeological enterprises is physical anthropology, a branch of physical anthropology. Let us look how physical anthropology relates itself to archaeology. Number one, physical anthropology talks about man's adaptive success. If there is a species which has an adaptive success, its adaptive success depends on several factors. One of the main factors on which its adaptive success depends is its ability to obtain resource from the environment. How do you obtain resource from the environment? A monkey obtains resource from the environment by way of his own hand and teeth. But a man, the moment he enters the genus Homo, he tries to retrieve the resource potential of a given ecosystem by way of tools. So he is the manufacturer of tools. The tools, therefore, are a media through which the resource is retrieved. And the success in your resource retrieval gives you success of survival strategy, and survival strategy success gives you adaptational success. In other words, the evolutional parameters which makes the fossil man change from one level to the other entirely depends on his cultural success. So here are two dimensions which goes hand in hand, which of course cannot be proved but can be argued out. And therefore, physical anthropology is one of the branches of anthropology which is very close to the working of an archaeologist. In fact, an archaeologist all the time uses terms of physical anthropologists in order to talk about adaptational success. The adaptational success also depends on another branch. If you have hunger for two persons and two persons retrieve material from the environment, then you cannot have these two persons take care of 4 hungers or 5 hungers. So in other words, number of people in a band determines the success of adaptational resource retrieval potentiality. The resource that you retrieve from the environment will be 100 times more if you have 100 members in the band. So in other words, paleodemography is closely related to adaptational success as well. So we have seen how physical anthropology is very closely related to archaeology, but it is also very closely related to paleodemography. So if you have paleodemography, you have also to ask for what causes the increase in the population. And we find that if there is infant death, very high infant death rate, then the population does not increase. In other words, paleopathology or parasitology also becomes a component subject which helps us in understanding archaeology. Suppose you are seeking adaptation in a low-lying area in the estuary of a river. It will have large amount of parasites, human vector, malaria is one of them, and you have diarrhea, you have other kinds of diseases for which will make a lady's 8 or 9 children, only one survive out of 8 and 9 children. So the infant mortality rate or paleodemographic parasites and the paleodemographic other attributes become very important to show how the resource retrieval potentiality is maximized. And that also links itself to the success of survival strategy of physical anthropology. So if there is no success of survival, let us say for about 2000 years, then there will be no speciation of these 2000 years. Whereas in a site called B, another site, there can be rapid speciation of subspeciation because there is constant effort of increasing population, and the population requires more food, and therefore the relationship with the ecology and man has to be intensified. In other words, if a population does not increase, it does not develop cultural progression. If it does not develop cultural progression, biological readaptation is not necessitated. And if biological readaptation is not necessitated, subspecies formation, mutation and genetic drift will not be operationalized. So there is a very intimate relationship of these three branches, let us say paleodemography, paleopathology and parasitology, and of course physical anthropology and cultural anthropology. We come to another branch. We are talking in the air. This happens, that happens. The resource is from the ecosystem. So we have to have some idea of what kind of ecosystem man has sought adaptation to. In other words, paleoecology is a fundamental component of our argument. What kind of ecology was chosen? Steppe, grassland, rainforest, savanna, you have all kinds of terms which designates a variety of ecosystem. And you know, man developed, or the species Homo evolved in a savanna land. So you have grassland which has played a very important role in adaptational success. And adaptational success means subspeciation. Adaptational success means the development of new and newer forms. So this is a kind of relationship that we have in terms of the various subdisciplines, and paleoecology or attributes of paleoecology become very important. We come to a subject called palynology or pollen analysis. It is true that all plants are not flowering plants and they don't give pollens, but whatever plants give pollens, from the pollens, we can identify what kind of ecosystem was there where man sought adaptation. Was it a rainforest? A rainforest where the canopy is connected to each other so that sun cannot reach the ground. Now this is a kind of ecosystem where man cannot seek adaptation. Only elephants can live in this kind of ecosystem. This is called rainforest ecology. Northeast India has rainforest ecology. No wonder Northeast India has also huge amount of elephants. Terai has also one of these ecosystem. Man never sought adaptation to this ecosystem. And how do I know? Because what is a kind of rainforest today? I don't know whether it is Pleistocene period, it was a steppe land, or it was a rainforest. So only palynology will let me know. In palynology, we try to find out the pollens and we identify non-arboreal plants and arboreal plants. And if you find that in my pollen profile, non-arboreal plants are more than 60% and arboreal plants are less than 40%, I can make a statement, say this is a grassland. If the non-arboreal plants are 90%, arboreal plants are 10%, I say it's a classic steppe land. Grassland, steppe land. So I can make statement of this kind when I know what is the percentage of arboreal plants to non-arboreal plants. Arboreal plants are like gramine, grasses, bushes, no, I'm sorry, non-arboreal plants, grasses, bushes, and they don't have large trees. Now this is the kind of ecology in which man evolved, especially in East Africa. You have the steppe lands where man evolved. Now, we have also some kind of evidence that we can seek from paleobotany. Not palynology only, but paleobotany. Now, paleobotany gives us a very good indication of stable ecosystem because plants don't move, they can't migrate. Plants stay there. If the ecology is not suitable, it will die. If the ecology is suitable, it will survive. So they are very stable indicators of the ecosystem. Suppose I find one area where paleobotanically I find there are huge amount of xerophytes. The moment I find xerophytes, I say, look, this is a kind of period of desertification which has started. Rainfall has gone below 20 inches. Now, this is the environment that I'm trying to reconstruct. Why? Because the environment is the basic resource retrieval base. This is the base from which the resource will be retrieved. Last but not the least is a very interesting subject that has developed recent years. I think it's after 1970s. A man called Peter Bellwood from Australia. He tried to use the Neolithic evidences of India to create a subject called archaeolinguistics. Now, this is very interesting. Archaeolinguistics is therefore another subject that is now to be added along with paleobotany, paleontology, paleopathology, paleodemography, and now archaeolinguistics, in order to say as the branches that can combine together to effect archaeological enterprises. It so happens that 6000 BC dates rise keeps on occurring in eastern part of the Middle Ganga Valley. Starting from Gorakhpur, where you have a famous site called Laura Deva, from there going up to Kuchai in Kachar hills, you find rise or evidence of rice in one form or the other, even going to Saran district in Chirand, where you have a pottery. In the pot material, you have husk of rice, and from the husk, that is a tempering agent. From the husk, you can identify this species, and it has been identified as a Oryza sativa, that means domesticated rice. Now, rice up to 6000 BC in the eastern corridor, and Mundari speakers are exogenous to India. It seems Mundari or one of the Austroasiatic languages came from the east, and they came, according to Peter Bellwood, they came with rice. So the people who brought rice were Mundari speakers. Now please hold on. People who came from the east brought Mundari language, and that is how rice spread to eastern India, and then a little part of eastern Madhya Pradesh even, or Chhattisgarh. The same date, 6000 BC, you have western corridor of India, Mehergarh, Kiligul Muhammad, Dam Sadat, this entire belt of western India. You have wheat and barley. Now we know Indo-European language is exogenous to India. It has come from outside, Altaic or Indo-European. I don't say Indo-Aryan, but I'm saying Indo-European. So Peter Bellwood says that rice, while rice brought Mundari language from the east, wheat and barley brought Indo-European language from the west. So for somehow the language and the seed of adaptation, a kind of subject was created. Now, it is very interesting. Its language spreads very fast if the people are moving. But agriculture by definition is something where people don't move. People select a land and they have to wait for 90 days for the seed to ripen and to make the harvest. So since these communities don't move, this language remain isolated with the crop. So the crop came and the cultivators made it. This is another point. Rice is not an easy crop to plant. It requires double plantation, and it was some kind of a special habit of these people who brought this culture of rice plantation. Wheat and barley, of course, can be planted the way from the Zagros mountain in Syria and Tel Moribad in Middle East. We have sites where wild barley is growing even today. So you have wild seeds, and from there they have brought it down and in bogs and little river banks, narrow strips of alluvial soils, they have started farming. But the point that they brought a language with it makes it a very interesting study. It's not very much accepted, this archaeolinguistic of Peter B. Lund, but then it is a very fascinating branch that has been added in the recent years. The interesting point is that after a while, this is 6000 BC, Lahura Deva in Gorakhpur and Mehergarh in Baluchistan. Bring it to 3000 BC, or it's about 2700 BC. When you go to Harappa, which is also in the western area, Harappa is in Rajasthan, in Haryana, and of course in Punjab and Sindh. This entire belt of Harappan culture, we have rice. So rice somehow has moved from Lahura Deva, from east. There was no rice in Mehergarh. So rice somehow has moved from east to the west. Now let us look at the western sides. Eastern sides. You have in Middle Ganga, Taradi, you have Jhusi, you have many sites which are New Chalco sites, and here you find wheat. So there seems to be a double way migration of rice cultivators going to the west and the wheat cultivators going to the east. So a kind of amalgamation of the technology of these two cultivation of primary cereals that form the mainstay of Neolithic culture of India, having developed in this manner. Having said as much, we'll see that it is very difficult to find out or itemize name of subjects which are related to archaeology. You can go on and on and on. I'll give you one example. How physical anthropology is linked with archaeology. Man became, after he became Homo erectus 1.8 million years ago, man became daytime hunter. And the moment he became daytime hunter, God or nature saw that the body hair is lost. If the body hair is lost, it was lost because multiple sweat pores had to be included so that the skin can be kept cold, and because you were doing daytime hunting, so the sweat pores increased and the body hair was lost. But there were winters, there was night. So when you don't have the fur or you don't have the body hair and yet you have the cold coming in, then what do? You try to take the leather of the hunted animal and wrap it around yourself. Now this leather activity as a consequence of lack of body hair, which is a physical anthropological concept, is very well reflected in the archaeological domain. We will find large number of borers included from Middle Paleolithic. There was no borer in Lower Paleolithic. The moment you come to Middle Paleolithic, you find a huge number of borers, as if you have implements to make hole in leathers, and in the leather holes you try to wrap it around yourself. So here is a relationship. I'm trying to say that subjects, you cannot isolate subjects which are related to anthropology or archaeology because they're all intimately related from inside. The main concern of the entire drama is an animal called man. It's man who requires adaptational success. It's man who requires food 2 times a day. It's man who has to survive himself from the predating animals and so on. As a genus and as a species, Homo sapien or early Homo erectus, they have a problem. The problem is that when he has adaptational success, he is also worried about how his children or his F1 generation will have the same success. So he creates something called an ideological realm. Cultural anthropology is a domain, though it is a non-tangible reality. And when you talk of cultural anthropology, it becomes very difficult because you can't prove 90% of the points that you're trying to discuss. They have left no evidences. Ideology, for instance, is something which leaves no material evidence. But the fact that Homo sapien or Homo erectus is a species which has the ability to pass on his adaptational success to the next generation, the tricks of success to the next generation, is something which is called tradition. So you pass it on by a method of tradition. Suppose you have two children and you tell them, please don't do like this, do like this. The children will say, no, I will do like that. Then you have to create a realm of punishment and prize and punishment as 2 points by which you try to maintain a behavioral action within the community. Now these are self-operated ideological realm. Ideological realm creates what is known as cosmogony. Cosmogony means you create a mythology, you create a folk history which will say our ancestors did this, therefore they were successful. And if you do it, you will be successful. In other words, you are constantly told in a group behavior that you must do this. How do you articulate it? Suppose you say you must do it to survive well. But how do you say it? You say it verbally, it makes no sense. So you create what is known as ritual. Ritual is articulation of faith. A faith is a belief. And a belief is a non-photographable item. You can't photograph a belief. So how do you give it a tangible shape? You give it a tangible shape by way of what is known as rituals. And one of the rituals that we find in all cave paintings and everywhere is that a group of boys or group of men or women are holding hands and dancing. Now, this is a classic example of a kind of a ritual where you create what is known as organic solidarity. We the Santals, we the Mundas, we the Blablas, we the community. So the feeling of a we makes them say, we don't do this, they do it. They are fishermen community. Success of survival strategy in them is different. Success of survival strategy among us is different. Let us take the example of the rice and the wheat cultivators. Their time of plantation and harvesting is different. So a community develops its own ethos. And this is verbalized, this is articulated by way of a plethora of rituals. Cultural anthropology is such a nebulous subject for us in prehistory because they leave nothing as product of behavior. In a living community, cultural anthropology, you can go with a video cassette and you can ask the people why they do something and you can record it. But the past, all the behavior, all the belief, all the traditions are in the mind and they are dead. Only their leftovers are available. So we create some kind of ethnoarchaeology in order to say that look, cultural anthropology is also playing a very important role in trying to maintain a behavior through generations. So you have a behavior which is common in a group and the group continues to behave in the same way, not because they have the same blood, because otherwise 16th century Bengalis would have become Tamilians in 20th century. What is it that maintains the 16th century Bengalis as Bengalis in 20th century, or the Eskimos remain the Eskimos? The point I'm trying to make is it is not the blood, it is the articulation of faith by way of which the feeling of we is inculcated in them by constructing a plethora of mythologies. Now these mythologies are usually referred to in technical term as cosmogony. Cosmogony is the mythology of origin. Every community creates a mythology of origin and it transfers it to the community members by way of which is called rituals. So ritual is a mechanism of articulation of faith. Why? Because faith is not photographable. Faith is not tangible. You can't hold faith and show faith. So the only way you can articulate faith is by way of a vivid, a very dynamic ritual. And these vivid and dynamic rituals are sometimes done in the dead of the night, sometimes done in a full moon day or whatever, to make it an eerie environment, and you pass it on to the next generation. Hello, this is the way we have been successful, and you jolly well do this to become successful. So you see, cultural anthropology also has a very important role to play, because the actor in my drama is a man. And man creates culture, man creates adaptational success. So it's man everywhere, and you have plethora of subjects in which you get entangled when you try to create a composite picture of the past. Let us conclude now. We have started with the relationship of various subjects with anthropology, and these various subjects of anthropology that are related in terms with archaeology. And while doing so, we found the closest one is physical anthropology, because both physical anthropologists, at least in the last century, and the archaeologists are fossil hunters. They are all the time doing extensive exploration to hunt for fossils, because they had the missing link fixation in their mind of Charles Darwin, and they wanted to prove the missing link. Good enough. And we have been having a very congenial relationship with physical anthropology for the entire last century, and even half of the present century. But slowly physical anthropology started diverting into molecular genetics, and this paleontology, or hard evidence of evolution, remained a very restricted discipline in some parts of the world. Archaeology, however, did not stop. They kept on looking for material, and large amount of material kept coming without any fossil evidence accompanying them. So we could now extrapolate and say, in Turkana, in Lake Turkana in East Africa, you have this fossil with this stone tool. So if you don't have a fossil in, let us say, Rajasthan, and you just have the tool, you can extrapolate and say, well, this tool must be belonging to the same period of the taxon of let us say, early erectors. Now this kind of thing developed, and they started making a global approach to understanding human civilizational evolution, how civilization changed from its empirical base into the multiple facets of the civilizations that we see today. In doing so, we started asking questions about what are the other branches of subjects that we need to consider for understanding, for a fuller understanding of the developmental sequence. And we came first and foremost of all is the adaptational success. Adaptational success depends on how many hands are there to take the, all right, with 2 hands comes a mouth. But if your demography is large, your retrieval is large. So paleodemography becomes very important. In the same way, a paleodemography is indirectly related with child mortality. If your community has large number of children dying at young age, out of a number of children born, say 8 or 9, only 1 survives to maturity, then the child mortality rate is very low and very high. And therefore, if it is so high, then the population remains more or less static. And if the population remains more or less static, adaptational success and resource retrieval potentiality remains static. Such a community does not develop at all. So we try to look at the relationship of paleodemography with adaptational success. But the paramount thing that we have missed in this is the resource retrieval is from the ecosystem. So we must know something about the paleoecology. How is the ecosystem? If the ecosystem is, biodiversity is very rich, then also with a lesser number of demographic content, I can have a huge amount of material for survival. But if the demography is not rich, paleoecology, biodiversity is not rich, then my retrieval will be much lesser. So you find another subject called paleoecology, which becomes important subdiscipline. But paleoecology is a very huge discipline. It depends on paleobotany, paleontology, and you have to go into entirely new branches of disciplines and borrow their expertise in order to understand the ecosystem that man chose to adapt in. My question is one. Man came here and he was a successful man, and he developed from Paleolithic to Mesolithic. Why did he develop? Because he had adaptational success. If he didn't have adaptational success, he will not develop. So this is the kind of paradigm on which I am working, and I find it very, very useful in order to make a mosaic of composite picture. If I remain completely blank with archaeology, then I cannot go beyond saying it is a hand X, therefore it is a hand X, because it is a hand X, QED. And I don't have anything beyond the hand X or the antiquity to talk of. Similarly, you have burials, human burials in later periods, let's say, flexed burial, extended burial, trepanations, hole in the molars, hundreds of other paleopathological issues that can be reconstructed from the skeletons physical anthropologists do it. If the upper roof of the orbit is porous, there are a lot of pores, the man suffered from anemia. I know of paleopathology, anemia is not infected disease. But I can find other indicators in the bones which can talk about parasites. He had a huge amount of parasites, and therefore he had liver infection. So you have from the bones, the burials, you can talk about large amount of paleopathological issues which indirectly talk of success of adaptation. The same way you can talk about the cultural behavior of the people from the grave goods. There are sometimes with the grave, various pots of things are kept with the dead, and we can talk of the grave goods. Cultural anthropologists talk about it. So it's very difficult to draw a fine line and say we are physical anthropologists and we only do the skeletons. We are archaeologists, we only do the hand axes and cleavers. No, we don't. We are constantly borrowing information from other disciplines on which we're dependent. Thank you.